The air at the graduation ceremony was thick and sweet, smelling of cut grass and the cheap perfume of the woman sitting in front of him. Ethan sat perfectly still, a small, proud smile fixed on his face as he watched his son Leo adjust the cap on his head. The boy, no, the young man, looked so much like him, or so he had always thought. He had the same quiet intensity in his eyes, the same deliberate way of moving, as if he were measuring the world before taking a step. A sea of black caps and gowns undulated before him, a singular entity of shared achievement. Yet for Ethan, there was only Leo. His wife, Amelia, shifted beside him, the silk of her dress rustling like dry leaves. She leaned conspiratorially toward her father, Marcus, who sat on her other side, a monolith of expensive tailoring and casual disdain. Ethan wasn't meant to hear. The drone of the university dean on the stage was supposed to be a curtain of sound, insulating their private conversation. But the winds shifted, and the words, meant only for Marcus, were carried directly to Ethan's ear, as clear and sharp as shattered glass. "He's done well, I'll admit," Amelia murmured, her voice a low hum of feigned pride. "But it's my family's blood, of course. The boy isn't his, he's Julian's." The world did not stop. The dean did not falter in his speech. The sun did not fall from the sky. But for Ethan, the axis of his life tilted, a silent, cataclysmic shift that buckled 20 years of memory into a landscape of lies. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn. His smile remained, perhaps a fraction tighter at the edges, a testament to a discipline forged in 1,000 smaller humiliations. He felt the weight in his pocket, a familiar pressure against his thigh. It was a single, heavy brass key, ornate and old-fashioned, a key to a door they didn't know existed, leading to a room they couldn't imagine. It was the anchor that held him steady in this sudden, violent storm. They thought he was a simple man, a quiet architect of modest success, a placid harbor in which Amelia could moor her life while she sailed on other seas. They didn't know he was the ocean, and the tide was about to turn. Isn't it funny how a single sentence can change everything? One moment you're a father watching his son graduate, and the next, you're a stranger sitting next to a woman you thought you knew. I wonder if you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where the floor just falls away. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this story, this journey, is something I think we can all understand on some level. And if you enjoy what happens next, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. You won't want to miss how this ends. Now, let's get back to that day. The first humiliation had been a dinner 2 decades prior. Ethan, then a junior architect with a portfolio of brilliant but unbuilt designs, had been invited to Marcus Thorne's imposing mansion for Amelia's approval. He remembered the feeling of the house more than the look of it. It was a place built not for comfort, but for intimidation, with ceilings so high they seemed to belong to a different sky, and hallways that echoed with the ghosts of lesser men. Marcus, with his silver hair and predator's smile, had circled him like a shark inspecting a piece of driftwood. "So, you draw pictures of buildings," Marcus had said, swirling a brandy that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. He didn't ask it as a question, he stated it as a verdict. "A noble hobby." Amelia had laughed, a tinkling, nervous sound. "Father, Ethan is an architect. He designs things." "Semantics," Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Artists, architects, poets, you all play with ideas. Men like me, we play with the world itself. We build, we own." He had gestured vaguely at the walls around them, as if he had personally carved them from the mountain. Throughout the dinner, the assault continued, a series of carefully crafted remarks designed to dismantle Ethan's worth, piece by piece. His car was too practical. His suit was off the rack. His ambitions were quaint. Ethan had looked to Amelia for support, for a word of defense, for a simple, loving glance that would serve as a shield. He received nothing. She sat there, smiling, a beautiful, silent accomplice to her father's casual cruelty. She was a thorn, and the thorns did not defend, they presided. That night, driving home in his perfectly practical car, Ethan made a decision. He would not let this man, this family, define him. He would not exist in their shadow. He loved Amelia, or at least the version of her he believed existed beneath the Thorne family crest, and he wanted a life with her. But he would build that life on his own terms, on a foundation they could never see, let alone touch. The next day he incorporated a new firm under a name no one would ever connect to him, Daedalus Designs. He was its sole employee, its secret architect. While he continued his day job at a respectable but unremarkable firm, earning a salary that Marcus would deem acceptable, his nights were spent building an empire in the shadows. Daedalus Designs took on the projects no one else could solve, the impossible structures, the visionary cityscapes. Ethan worked through intermediaries, building a reputation as an enigmatic genius known only by his work. He never put his face or his real name to the designs. He just built. And he became very, very wealthy. The post-graduation dinner was held at Le Ciel, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. Its name was whispered among the city's elite, a place where fortunes were discussed over plates of meticulously arranged food. The reservation, of course, had been made by Marcus. As they were led to a private room overlooking the glittering city, Ethan felt like an actor in a play he had no desire to be in. The room was a microcosm of his life with the Thorns, opulent, cold, and centered entirely around Marcus. Julian was there. Of course he was there. Julian Vance, Marcus's protege and, as Ethan now knew, the man Amelia believed was Leo's father. He was everything Ethan was not, slick, overtly charming, dressed in a suit that shouted its price tag. He greeted Amelia with a kiss on the cheek that lingered a moment too long, and shook Ethan's hand with a grip that was meant to convey dominance. Ethan's own handshake was firm, calm, and revealed nothing. "Ethan, good to see you, old man," Julian said, his smile a flash of white teeth. "Must be proud. The boy's a credit to his mother's side of the family." The insult was as polished as his shoes. It was a well-practiced jab, one of many he delivered over the years. Ethan simply nodded. "We're all very proud of Leo." The conversation, steered by Marcus, was a monologue of his own successes, peppered with condescending questions directed at Ethan. "How is that little firm of yours doing, Ethan? Still managing to keep the lights on?" "We're doing fine, Marcus," Ethan replied, his voice even. He took a slow sip of water, feeling the cool liquid soothe a fire he couldn't show. Inside, he was running calculations. The holding company through Daedalus Designs operated had finalized the acquisition of the debt on two of Marcus's primary commercial properties just last week. Marcus was leveraged to the hilt, a fact he hid behind a wall of blustering confidence. He thought he was sitting at the top of the world. In reality, he was on a balcony with a rotten railing, and Ethan owned the building. Leo, caught between the two poles of the family, looked uncomfortable. He was a good kid, intelligent and sensitive. He had inherited none of Marcus's arrogance or Amelia's cold social ambition. He had always been closer to Ethan, sharing his love for design, for structure, for the quiet satisfaction of creating something real. They had spent countless hours building intricate models, sketching out fantastical buildings. It was a bond Ethan had cherished, a bond that now felt like a fragile piece of glass, one sentence away from shattering. "To Leo," Marcus said, raising his glass of champagne, "a thorn through and through. May he have the sense to build a real legacy, not just play with blueprints." Everyone raised their glass. Ethan met Leo's eyes across the table. He saw confusion there, and a flicker of loyalty. Leo knew who had sat with him late into the night, teaching him the principles of stress and load, who had shown him the beauty in a perfectly balanced arch. It wasn't Marcus, it wasn't Julian, it was Ethan. Ethan raised his glass, the smile still fixed on his face. He was playing a long game, and the final moves were already in motion. The key in his pocket felt heavier than ever, a promise of a reckoning that was coming as surely as the dawn. The genesis of Daedalus Designs was a single, sleepless night after that first dinner at Marcus Thorne's estate. Ethan had lain in bed. The memory of their condescending smiles burned into his mind. He wasn't angry, not in a hot, reckless way. It was a cold, clarifying rage, the kind that settles deep in your bones and fuels you for years. He saw his future laid out before him, a lifetime of being patted on the head, of being the stable, simple husband to the glamorous Amelia Thorne, a footnote in the grand story of her family's legacy. He rejected it utterly. He went to his small home office, little more than a desk in a spare room, and sketched until the sun came up. He didn't sketch the sensible, budget-conscious buildings his day job required. He sketched the impossible. A tower that twisted toward the sky like a strand of DNA. A cantilevered museum that hung over a gorge, defying gravity. A library shaped like an open book, its pages made of glass and steel. These were the designs he kept hidden, the true expression of his genius. He realized then that he had been hiding his light not just from the Thornes, but from the world. Operating as Daedalus was a masterclass in compartmentalization. To his family, he was Ethan Miller, a competent but unremarkable architect at a mid-tier firm. He drove a sensible sedan, wore department store suits, and discussed his modest projects with a convincing air of mild satisfaction. But 2 nights a week, and every Saturday, he would go to a small, anonymous office he leased in a different part of the city. There he became Daedalus. His first commission was an anonymous design competition for a new concert hall in Dubai. He won. The fee was astronomical, more than he made in 5 years at his regular job. He funneled the money into a series of shell corporations, creating a labyrinthine financial structure that was impossible to trace back to Ethan Miller. He hired a brilliant, elderly lawyer named Samuel Reed to be the public face of his operation, a man whose unimpeachable reputation lent gravitas to the mysterious Daedalus. Over the next 2 decades, Daedalus Designs became a legend in the world of architecture and high finance. They didn't just design buildings, they orchestrated entire developments. Ethan's gift wasn't just in aesthetics, it was in seeing the whole board. He understood how a single, iconic building could revitalize an entire district, how strategic property acquisition could reshape a city skyline. He bought land, he acquired debt, he invested in technology companies that were revolutionizing construction. He built a silent, invisible empire. All the while he lived his other life. He married Amelia. He raised Leo. He endured the endless stream of condescension from her family. He watched as Julian Vance, a man of superficial charm and deep-seated insecurity, became a fixture in their lives, first as Marcus's right-hand man, then as something more to Amelia. Ethan saw the signs, the late-night phone calls she tried to hide, the shared glances that held too much meaning, the trips Julian and Amelia took for the company, from which she always returned with a brittle, guilty energy. He had suspected for years that Leo might not be his biological son. The thought was a constant, low-level ache, a grief he could never fully process because he could never acknowledge it. He had pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the reality of his fatherhood. He was the one who had stayed up with a colicky infant Leo. He was the one who had taught him to ride a bike, who had checked his homework, who had sat in the audience for every terrible school play. He was Leo's father in every way that mattered. Biology was a footnote, a detail. But hearing Amelia's words at the graduation, the casual, dismissive confirmation of his deepest fear, spoken as a point of pride, had changed everything. It wasn't just about the lie, it was about the contempt, the belief that he was so insignificant he wouldn't even warrant a respectable deception. The symbolic key in his pocket was for the penthouse of the Orion Tower, Marcus Thorne's crown jewel. It was the tallest building in the city, a monument to Marcus's ego. For the last 5 years, Marcus had been trying to secure funding to build a sister tower, Orion II, which he believed would cement his legacy. What he didn't know was that Daedalus Designs, through a subsidiary, had been systematically buying up every parcel of land around the Orion Tower. Furthermore, Ethan had acquired the controlling interest in the European bank that held the mortgage on the original tower. Marcus thought he was an emperor. He was a tenant, and his lease was about to expire. The key was a duplicate Ethan had made weeks ago. A key to a home Marcus didn't know he'd already lost. A few weeks after the graduation dinner, the first tremors hit the Thorne empire. A major investor in the Orion II project pulled out, citing market instability. A zoning board unexpectedly denied a crucial variance, citing a new environmental impact report that seemed to appear from nowhere. A story broke in a major financial journal about the precarious level of debt carried by Thorne Developments. Each event was a perfectly calibrated strike, a move in a game only Ethan was playing. Marcus was a man who thrived on control. As his control began to slip, he became volatile. He bellowed at his subordinates, his voice echoing through the marble halls of his office. He made frantic calls to his contacts, only to find them suddenly unavailable or unhelpful. The walls, which he had always believed were his fortress, were beginning to close in. Predictably, he called a family meeting at the mansion. It was a Sunday afternoon. The mood was funereal. Amelia's face was tight with anxiety, her usual social grace replaced by a brittle tension. Julian paced by the fireplace, pretending to be a concerned lieutenant, but radiating an aura of self-preservation. Marcus sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a king surveying a crumbling kingdom. "We have a temporary liquidity problem," Marcus began, his voice attempting a tone of command that he could no longer sustain. "Our partners are getting skittish. We need to show them that we are stable. We need a capital injection to calm the waters." His eyes swept the room and landed, inevitably, on Ethan. "Ethan," he said, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous authority, "you've been with this family for 20 years. You have benefited from our name, from our generosity. You live a comfortable life because of us." Ethan remained silent, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He simply watched, letting Marcus spin his narrative. "I know you're careful with your money," Marcus continued, the word careful dripping with the implication of being small-minded and cheap. "You must have a respectable nest egg saved up from that little job of yours. It's time for you to step up. For the family, we need you to liquidate your portfolio. Whatever you have, it will be a loan, of course, a show of faith." Amelia chimed in, her voice sharp. "He's right, Ethan. It's the least you can do. Think of all we've done for you. For Leo, this family has given you everything." The audacity of it was breathtaking. They had spent 2 decades treating him as a second-class citizen, a court jester whose only purpose was to provide a stable, boring backdrop for their dramatic lives. Now, in their first moment of genuine crisis, they demanded he sacrifice his security for them, framing it not as a request, but as a duty he had failed to recognize. It was the ultimate humiliation, the final confirmation of his status in their eyes. A resource to be tapped, a tool to be used. Ethan let the silence stretch. He looked from Marcus's desperate, demanding face to Amelia's cold, entitled expression. He saw Julian watching him with a smug, challenging smirk, as if daring him to refuse. He took a slow breath. "No," he said. The word was quiet. It was not angry. It was not defiant. It was a simple statement of fact, a closing door. Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "What did you say?" "I said no," Ethan repeated, his voice still perfectly level. "My finances are my own concern. They will not be used to cover the debts of Thorne Developments." Amelia stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "How dare you? After everything my father has done for you, you are a part of this family." "Am I?" Ethan asked, and for the first time, a hint of steel entered his voice. He looked directly at her. "That's a very recent development, isn't it? My status as family seems to only emerge when something is required of me." "This is unacceptable," Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the desk. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. "You are being selfish, ungrateful." "I am being prudent," Ethan cut in, his calm a stark contrast to Marcus's fury. "And I would advise you to do the same." He stood up. "I believe this meeting is over." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving a tableau of stunned, sputtering rage in his wake. He did not look back. As he walked down the long, echoing hallway, he could hear Marcus begin to shout again. Not at him, but at Amelia, at Julian, at the world that was refusing to bend to his will. The foundations of their house were cracking, and they had just discovered that the man they thought was a humble groundskeeper was actually the architect of their ruin. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion collapse. Marcus Thorne, a man who had always moved through the world with the assumption that it would part for him, found himself hitting walls at every turn. Banks that had courted him for years now sent his calls to voicemail. Business partners he'd known for decades suddenly remembered prior commitments. The city, which had once seemed like his personal fiefdom, was now an alien landscape of bureaucratic obstacles and closed doors. He grew desperate. His bluster gave way to a snarling paranoia. He blamed Julian, accusing him of incompetence and disloyalty. He blamed Amelia for marrying a useless freeloader who wouldn't help them in their time of need. He blamed the market, the government, the inscrutable whims of fate. It never once occurred to him to blame himself. And it certainly never occurred to him that the quiet, unassuming man he had belittled for 20 years could be the cause of his downfall. Ethan watched it all from a distance, with a kind of detached, sorrowful precision. There was no joy in it. He was not a vengeful man. This was not an act of passion. It was a correction, a rebalancing of an equation that had been wrong for far too long. His days were unchanged. He went to his job at the mid-tier firm. He came home. He spoke with Leo about his plans for postgraduate studies. But his nights were spent at the Daedalus office, directing the final stages of his plan. He was like a demolition expert who had spent years carefully placing charges throughout a condemned building. The structure still stood, but its integrity was gone. All that remained was to push the button. The invitation came via a formal, cream-colored envelope. Marcus Thorne requested the pleasure of Ethan's company for a dinner at the mansion. The stated purpose was to resolve our recent misunderstandings and move forward as a family. Ethan knew what it really was. It was a final, desperate gambit. Marcus would try a different tactic, feigned remorse, an appeal to sentiment, perhaps even a thinly veiled threat. He had exhausted rage and demand. Now he would try manipulation. Ethan accepted. The night of the dinner was unnaturally still. A thick blanket of fog had rolled in from the coast, muffling the city in a gray silence. The Thorne mansion, usually a beacon of light and power on its hilltop perch, seemed to float in the mist, its windows like vacant eyes. As Ethan drove up the long, winding driveway, he felt a sense of finality settle over him. He was not just driving to a dinner, he was driving to the end of a life he had lived for 2 decades. He was met at the door not by a butler, but by Amelia herself. Her face was pale, her smile a strained, fragile thing. She was wearing a simple black dress, a stark departure from her usual vibrant colors. It was a costume of contrition. "Ethan, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice low. "You invited me," he replied simply. They walked into the grand dining room. The long table was set for 4. Marcus, Amelia, Julian, and himself. A united front, or a firing squad. Marcus was already seated at the head of the table, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older than he had just a few weeks ago. The iron certainty in his posture had been replaced by a weary tension. Julian stood by the window, staring out into the fog, his usual easy confidence gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a man on a ledge. "Ethan," Marcus began, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you for coming. I think we got off on the wrong foot a few weeks ago. I was under a great deal of stress. I said things I shouldn't have." It was the closest Marcus Thorne had ever come to an apology. It was, Ethan knew, utterly meaningless. It was a strategic move, not a moment of genuine regret. Ethan simply inclined his head and took his seat. The dinner was a surreal affair. A silent, efficient staff served course after course of exquisite food that no one seemed to taste. The conversation was stilted, a series of false starts and awkward pauses. Marcus attempted to reminisce about the good times, painting a picture of a happy, unified family that Ethan had never been a part of. Amelia chimed in, her anecdotes sounding hollow and rehearsed. Julian remained mostly silent, his eyes darting between Marcus and Ethan. Ethan ate slowly, methodically. He was in no hurry. He let them play out their scene, letting the tension in the room build and coil. He felt the brass key in his pocket, its edges smooth against his fingertips. It was a tangible piece of the truth in a room thick with lies. He was waiting for the right moment, the perfect silence in which to place the single word that would bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. The pretense was over. "Ethan," he said, his voice now stripped of its false bonhomie. "Let's be frank. My company is in trouble. Serious trouble. I have devoted my entire life to building it. It is my legacy. It is Leo's legacy." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "I know you think I've been hard on you over the years, and perhaps I have. I see now that I misjudged you. You are a more substantial man than I gave you credit for." Another strategic concession, another empty phrase. "I am asking you, man to man," Marcus continued, his eyes boring into Ethan's. "Not as a father-in-law, but as a partner. Help me. Your investment combined with my experience, we can weather this storm. We can save the company. We can save this family." He leaned back, his plea delivered. He clearly believed this performance of humility and respect was his checkmate. He had offered Ethan a seat at the table, a place in the inner circle. It was the thing he believed Ethan had always craved. The silence that followed was profound. The fog pressed against the windows, sealing them in. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a second falling away from the life they had known. Ethan placed his napkin neatly on the table. He looked at Marcus, then at Julian, and finally his gaze settled on his wife, Amelia. "Amelia," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "At Leo's graduation, I was sitting right next to you. The wind shifted. I heard what you said to your father." He paused, letting the words sink in. He watched the blood drain from Amelia's face, leaving it a mask of pure, horrified shock. He saw Marcus's eyes widen in confusion, then narrow in dawning comprehension. Julian froze, a statue of guilt. "You said, the boy isn't his. He's Julian's." The quiet bomb had been dropped. The detonation was absolute and utterly silent. The air in the room seemed to crystallize, every molecule charged with the force of the revelation. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was a perfect, terrible stillness. The moment after the lightning flash, but before the thunder. Amelia was the first to break. A choked, strangled sound escaped her lips. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted from Ethan to her father, as if searching for a script, a way to undo what had just been said. But there was no script for this. This was reality, raw and unforgiving. Marcus stared at Ethan, his face a maelstrom of emotions. Confusion warred with anger, but beneath it all was a flicker of something new, fear. He had always seen Ethan as a simple problem, one that could be solved with condescension or money. He was suddenly realizing that Ethan was not a problem at all. He was a solution, just not to Marcus's benefit. What is this? Marcus stammered, his voice losing its baritone authority. What kind of game are you playing? It's no game, Ethan replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. He turned his attention from Amelia and addressed Marcus directly. For 20 years I have sat at this table and listened to you talk about your legacy. I have endured your insults, your dismissiveness, your profound and unending contempt. You saw me as nothing more than a piece of furniture in your daughter's life, a stable, uninteresting fixture. You never once saw me as a man. He let that hang in the air, a simple, irrefutable truth. You belittled my work, he continued, beginning the list of grievances, each one delivered with the cold precision of an auditor. You called my ambition quaint. You mocked my home, my car, my clothes. You did everything in your power to make me feel small, to ensure I knew my place in your world. And you, he said, his gaze shifting to Amelia, you let him. You stood by and watched, and your silence was his greatest weapon. Amelia began to cry, silent tears tracking through her perfect makeup. Ethan, I didn't. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Ethan's voice was gentle, but the question was devastating. You chose. Every day you chose. You chose your father's approval over your husband's dignity. You chose this house, this name, this legacy over the one we could have built together. And then you made the most profound choice of all. You chose another man, and you let me believe his son was mine. He looked at Julia, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. And you pretended to be my friend. You ate at my table, played with my son, all while betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. The moral mirror was in place. He had shown them not what he thought of them, but what they truly were, reflected in their own actions. The image was ugly, and they could not look away. But this isn't just about personal betrayal, Ethan said, his tone shifting. The family drama was over. The business lecture was about to begin. This is about consequence, Marcus. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved the heavy brass key. He placed it on the table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. Do you recognize this? He asked. Marcus stared at it. It's a key. What of it? It's the master key to the penthouse suite of the Orion Tower, Ethan said. Your flagship building, your legacy. He paused. Or rather, my flagship building. Marcus's laugh was a harsh, incredulous bark. What are you talking about? You're delusional. Am I? Ethan's voice was soft. Who do you think has been buying up the land around your tower for the past 5 years, blocking your expansion at every turn? Who do you think acquired the controlling interest in Deutsche International Bank, the institution that holds your primary mortgage? Who do you think has been strategically buying up your corporate debt on the open market, piece by piece? He leaned forward slightly. You've been so obsessed with your own reflection, Marcus, that you never thought to look at who owned the mirror. You think you're in a fight with the market. You're not. You're in a fight with me, and you lost before you even knew it had begun. He gestured to the key. The holding company that owns the tower, the land, and your debt is a subsidiary of a design and development firm called Daedalus Designs. I am Daedalus. The sale of the Orion Tower was finalized this morning to cover a fraction of your outstanding obligations. The building is mine. The company you built is nothing more than a hollow shell, and I hold the title. The room was utterly silent, save for Amelia's ragged breathing. Marcus looked as if he'd been physically struck. His face, already pale, turned a waxy, ashen gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The edifice of his entire life, the grand narrative of Marcus Thorne, the master builder, had just been leveled by a single, quiet statement. Then Ethan delivered the final blow. He turned back to Amelia. And as for Leo, he said, reaching into his breast pocket in pulling out a folded document. You were so certain, so proud of your thorn blood, but you were wrong about that too. He didn't unfold it, he just held it. This isn't a DNA test. I never needed one. This is Leo's pediatric medical file. When he was 6, he had a severe reaction to an antibiotic. It triggered a very rare autoimmune condition, a genetic marker called HNA3B deficiency. It occurs in less than 1% of the population. He placed the document on the table next to the key. It's a recessive gene, Amelia. Both parents have to be carriers. My family has a history of it. My mother had it. I am a carrier. Julian, he said, not even bothering to look at the other man, I took the liberty of checking your public medical data from your insurance physicals. You are not. He finally looked at his wife, his eyes holding not anger, but a profound, weary sadness. He's not Julian's son, Amelia. He was never Julian's son. He's mine. He has always been mine. Your affair, your great betrayal, it was all for nothing. A sordid, pathetic secret you kept for 20 years, and it was all based on a lie you told yourself. The structure of their world did not just crack, it disintegrated. It turned to dust and blew away on the winds of a truth that had been patiently waiting for 2 decades. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, slumped in his chair, a broken old man staring at a brass key that represented the totality of his failure. All the condescension, all the arrogance had been directed at the one man who held his entire world in the palm of his hand. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it was almost poetic. Julian, seeing his own ruin approaching, made a move for the door. I have to go. I don't think so, Ethan said, his voice stopping Julian in his tracks. Your problem isn't just with me, Julian. It's with the district attorney. While I was examining Thorne Development's finances, I discovered a rather creative pattern of embezzlement, transferring funds to offshore accounts through dummy invoices for your consulting firm. It seems you've stolen nearly $10 million from the man you were cuckolding. He looked at Marcus. The evidence has been sent to my lawyers. Whether they forward it to the authorities is, for the moment, up to me. Julian collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. He was trapped. Amelia was on her feet, stumbling around the table toward Ethan. Ethan, please, she sobbed, reaching for him. Please, I didn't know. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. Her words were meaningless, the desperate incantations of a person who had lost everything and was now trying to salvage any piece of wreckage she could cling to. Ethan looked at her, at the woman he had once loved, and felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. He did not pull away from her touch, nor did he accept it. He simply stood, a fixed point in the chaos he had unleashed. Just then the dining room doors opened. A young man stood there, silhouetted against the light of the hallway. It was Leo. Dad, I got your text. You said it was important, he said, his eyes taking in the scene before him. His mother crying, his grandfather looking like a ghost, Julian Vance pale with terror. His gaze finally settled on his father, standing calm and resolute in the center of the storm. Leo, Ethan said, his voice softening for the first time that evening. Come in. It's time we had a talk. There are some things you need to know. The aftermath was not a single, explosive event, but a series of quiet, devastating collapses. In the Thorne mansion, a silence fell that would never truly be broken. Ethan spoke to Leo, not in the dining room of horrors, but in the library, a room filled with books Marcus had bought by the yard for their bindings, but which Ethan and Leo had actually read together. He told his son everything. He did not spare Amelia, but he did not vilify her either. He presented the facts of her affair and her deception with a clinical, sorrowful detachment. He explained the financial ruin of Marcus Thorne not as an act of revenge, but as the inevitable consequence of arrogance and mismanagement. He laid out 20 years of lies, not to poison Leo against his mother, but to finally give him the gift of truth. Leo listened, his face a mask of concentration. He was his father's son, analytical and thoughtful, even in the face of emotional turmoil. When Ethan finished, the young man was silent for a long time. "So," Leo said finally, his voice raspy, "all those years, you knew she was with him? And you stayed?" "I stayed for you," Ethan said simply. "You were my son. That was the only truth that mattered to me. I wasn't going to let their lies take you away from me." "And the medical file?" Leo asked, his eyes searching his father's. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Ethan said. "You are my son, Leo, in every conceivable way." Leo nodded slowly. Then he stood up, walked over to his father, and hugged him. It wasn't the awkward hug of a teenager, but the firm, supportive embrace of a man. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now," Ethan said, "we start over, on our own terms." Amelia was given a choice. Ethan did not throw her out into the street. That was not his way. He offered her a generous settlement, enough to live comfortably, but with a single, non-negotiable condition. She would give up any claim to the Thorn name or assets, what little was left of them. She would have to build a life of her own, away from the shelter of her father's tarnished legacy. She was no longer Mrs. Thornmiller, a society queen. She was just Amelia, a woman forced to confront the person she had become. After a week of desperate, pleading phone calls that went unanswered, she accepted. Marcus was offered a similar choice. Ethan, as his primary creditor, had the power to utterly destroy him, to force him into a humiliating personal bankruptcy. Instead, he restructured Marcus's debt under draconian but survivable terms. He forced Marcus to sell off the mansion, the fleet of cars, the private jet, all the trappings of his arrogance. Marcus was left with the husk of his company and a single clear mandate: rebuild it, but do it with integrity. Ethan would be watching. It was not forgiveness. It was a life sentence of hard, honest work, a punishment far more fitting for Marcus Thorne than simple ruin. As for Julian, Ethan made a single phone call. The $10 million he had embezzled was quietly returned to the company's accounts from one of Ethan's own funds. The evidence of his crime was then delivered to him with a simple message: disappear. He was last seen boarding a flight to a country with no extradition treaty, a man erased from the city's ledger. The days turned into weeks. The fog over the city lifted, replaced by a crisp autumn light. Ethan and Leo moved out of the suburban house that had been a stage for so many lies. Their new home was the penthouse of the Orion Tower. It was a space of clean lines, breathtaking views, and quiet, minimalist beauty. A home that reflected Ethan's true aesthetic. They spent their first evening there not talking about the past, but about the future. Leo, who had planned to take a job at Thorne Developments, was now considering a graduate program in architecture. "I was only going to work for Grandpa to, I don't know, make him happy, I guess," Leo admitted, looking out at the sprawling city lights below. "But my whole life I've wanted to build things, like you." "Not like me," Ethan corrected gently. "Like you. Your own designs, your own vision," he smiled. "But if you ever need a consultant, I know a guy." One afternoon, a month after the dinner, Ethan received a letter. It was from Amelia. It was not a plea for reconciliation or a demand for more money. It was just 2 pages, written in a hand he barely recognized. She wrote about her life, about the hollowness of the world she had been raised in, the constant pressure to be a thorn. She admitted her weakness, her fear, her profound mistake in underestimating his love and his strength. It was not an excuse, but an explanation, a confession. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply ended the letter with, "I hope one day you and Leo can be happy. You both deserve it." Ethan read the letter, then folded it and put it away. It was a chapter closing, not with a bang, but with a quiet, somber acknowledgement of what was lost. He felt a sense of release, the final loosening of a knot that had been tight in his chest for 20 years. His revenge was complete, but it did not taste sweet. It tasted like justice. It was not about tearing down, but about building something true in the place of something false. He had not destroyed a family. He had liberated two people, himself and his son, from one. Looking out from the highest point in the city, with his son by his side, sketching a new idea in a notebook, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The world below was a complex network of structures and systems, just like the one he had navigated in his own life. He had been the underestimated hero, the patient strategist who had played the long game. He had faced the arrogant elite and shown them that true power isn't in what you display, but in what you build, in the foundations you lay, in the integrity of your design. The humiliations were now just echoes, faint sounds from a life that was no longer his. The future was an empty blueprint waiting for a new design. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to draw. So, what do you think? Was Ethan's response justified? Did Marcus and Amelia get what they deserved? The line between justice and revenge can be a thin one, and I'm always fascinated to hear where you think that line is. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's a complicated situation, and there are no easy answers, which is what makes stories like this so powerful. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of karma, consequence, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your own life. Until next time, remember that the most impressive structures are often the ones with the quietest, deepest foundations.